All right, let's bring in our next guest. She's Carole Boyce-Davies. She's a professor of Africana Studies at Cornell University. She joins us now from Ithaca in upstate New York. Pleasure to have you on. The measure says, basically, from the administration, many of the rioters, arsonists, and left-wing extremists who have carried out and supported these acts have explicitly identified themselves with ideologies such as Marxism and call for the destruction of the United States system of government, and that the protesters have a deep ignorance of our history. I mean, are these people ignorant of their country's history?
No, I think there's a range. There's a range of people, clearly. And this is a global movement. This is not just specific to the United States. And it has to do with the fact that in what is called European modernity, the logic was that Western European man installed himself as the only person to be represented in that kind of dignity that one would want. As a result, everybody else is not represented. So there's a clear inequality in all of these representations, which are marks of conquest wherever they occur. So in Trinidad and Tobago, Columbus is being targeted as to be removed as well, the statue of Columbus. So I think we have to look at it in terms of that long history in which the representations of human beings tended to be skewed to Western European man, and that's how they're represented, usually in poses of domination and so on. So I think a fairer assessment of this would come from leadership, which would talk about what would be best to do at this point in history when there are so many questions about representation. And one of the people who was shown a while ago talked about putting them in museums. That probably is the best option. And it could be a wonderful presentation that showed when they were erected and what happened in a particular point in time when they were removed, and then what else should be there. So that in England, for example, I was told that there are only 2 representations of Black people, period, in the entire country in terms of monuments and statues. So therefore, there has to be an equivalence, a balance that challenges this question of representation at the level of statuary and monuments and so on.
Okay, Professor, I understand your argument on fair representation, but in terms of these statues being defaced and brought down and torn down, I mean, Natasha in her news story gave examples, but where exactly do you draw the line? I mean, with all these monuments and statues, I mean, one example I could give you is some of the founding fathers of the United States, I believe, were slave owners. I mean, do you take down Thomas Jefferson's?
Well, I think this is what the next generation is saying, and they're bringing a completely different analysis to the same point that you're making. And this is why I said there should be some place where there's a discussion of this so that one understands what is valid or not. I'm sure you heard as well representations of Jesus, which are Europeanized, have been also identified as targetable. And these are issues that people have faced consistently, but have had to just turn away from or accept or do nothing about. And what I keep saying is that at least there's a generation now that is raising this question so that one could at least have a fair and balanced discussion of what kinds of representation would represent everybody, the entire population, which is not what happens right now.
Okay, fair and balanced discussion is what's needed, but and you said a lot is actually falls upon this next generation, but what is the next step for them? It's fine to have a discussion, but what's the end game here?
The end game is balance. I think that's what they want. And they would like to not be able to walk around and see people who have been identified in terms of conquest still being the only ones represented. I'm not speaking for them. I'm trying to understand what's going on. But I understand quite clearly the need to challenge the dominance of certain kinds of representations which remain in place and which nobody seems to have a thought with that or had anything wrong about them. And I think this is where we are right now. And usually in society, you have that radical move, but then you have the coming back to some sort of balance, which allows us to then have a medium, kind of position in which everybody's ideas and everybody's sense of what should be fair is therefore represented. I don't think they should be criminalized and made to go to jail. There's a tendency by this president to do many executive orders. I was told at least four a month. 50 in the last 50 years, he's done the most. So he's running the country through a series of these executive orders. But you can't criminalize every single thing. There's some things that need a discussion, he needs to be out there talking to people to know what it is they want and how he can help to make it better.
All right, Professor Carole Boyce-Davies, thank you very much for joining us. I do appreciate your analysis.